You probably use social media, like WhatsApp, pretty much every day.
Oh, definitely. It's how we connect.
So chatting with friends, family, maybe work stuff too.
Yeah.
And increasingly, it's a tool for learning, right?
Yeah.
Especially languages.
So that one now, yeah.
But think about politeness. That feels so human, tied to a smile, tone of voice, all that. How does that actually work in, like, plain text messages? Especially when you're trying to learn the language itself at the same time.
That is such a good question because we rely so much on those nonverbal things face to face, don't we?
Seriously.
And they're just gone in text. So how learners figure that out or maybe don't is really key.
Exactly. And that's actually what we're diving into today. We're doing a deep dive into some specific research.
Okay.
It looked at EFL students, that's English as a foreign language in Indonesia, and specifically how they handled politeness in their class chats on WhatsApp.
Right. So our mission here for this deep dive is really to pull out the main findings from that study.
Yeah.
We want to understand how these students were actually using politeness strategies in that specific digital space. And maybe even more importantly, what kind of, real impact did that have on their English learning journey?
Right. And this whole exploration, just so you know, is based on a study published in the Indonesian Journal of English Language Teaching and Applied Linguistics. So, okay, let's unpack this.
So let's set the scene a bit. Social media, it's not just for hanging out anymore.
No?
For digital natives, it's just woven into everything, education included.
Definitely.
So teachers kind of have to adapt to figure out how to use these tools. And students, well, they already have expectations about using them.
And politeness. It's not just like an optional extra sprinkle on top.
No, absolutely not.
It's pretty fundamental for communication to work, right? Written or spoken. It's like the oil in the machine, keeps things smooth.
Yeah, avoids friction.
Makes sure messages land well, builds relationships. And in language learning, knowing how to be polite in English gives students those really practical skills.
Skills they'll actually use.
Exactly. Especially dealing with different cultures.
Yeah.
And it also helps create a more, respectful classroom vibe.
Which can really motivate students, make them feel more comfortable participating.
Yeah.
And WhatsApp is a perfect case study for this. This research confirmed it's super popular, particularly with these EFL students in Indonesia.
Right.
And other studies have shown it can really support like genuine communication practice, help students learn together.
Cooperative learning, yeah.
And just keep them engaged with English outside of the official class time.
But here's the tricky part with text, isn't it? Like you said, you lose all the face-to-face stuff.
All of it. The smile, the tone.
Body language.
Yeah.
So tone can get misinterpreted really easily.
Constantly.
So these WhatsApp chats give us this unique little window into how language learners navigate that social side, politeness, when those cues are just missing.
And it's been noted before, actually, that non-native speakers sometimes struggle a bit with using language that's appropriate for the online context,
Right.
which can, hold them back. So understanding netiquette, basically the unspoken rules of online behavior,
Internet etiquette, yeah.
that becomes a really practical skill in itself.
Okay, so to understand how politeness was working in these chats, the study used a couple of main theories, right, from linguistics.
Yeah, they leaned on two big ones.
The first is probably the most famous one, Brown and Levinson.
Foundational stuff.
They talk about face, which is basically your public image you want to maintain.
Your social self, yeah.
And there are two sides. Positive face, wanting to be liked, approved of,
Accepted.
and negative face, wanting to be, well, left alone, not imposed upon. Freedom to act.
Exactly. And based on that idea of face, they talked about the strategies people use when they might accidentally threaten someone else's face.
Like asking for something or disagreeing.
Right. So you could be bald on record, super direct, no messing about, like just saying, do this.
Okay, very plain.
Or you use positive politeness, trying to make the other person feel good, showing you're on the same side.
Building connection.
Yeah, using friendly nicknames, finding agreement, maybe cracking a joke, showing sympathy, that sort of thing.
Then there's negative politeness.
Mm-hmm.
This is more about respecting their space, their autonomy.
Right. Trying not to impose, so you might be indirect, use softeners like, could you possibly...
Hedging.
Yeah, hedging. Or apologizing for bothering them, or maybe making it impersonal, not using I or you.
Got it. And the last one?
Off record, which is basically just hinting, very indirect.
Okay. Though it's worth mentioning, I guess, that some people, like I'd, have pointed out this framework might be a bit Western-focused.
That's a fair point. Some cultures might prioritize group harmony over individual freedom of action differently. It's a nuance.
Okay, and the second framework they used.
That came from Lakoff. She focused more broadly on the social side of things, and she suggested communication kind of rests on two big principles: be clear and be polite.
Okay, be clear, sound straightforward,
Mm.
make sure people understand you, keep the conversation moving,
Pretty much. Be brief, be clear, be relevant, give the right amount of info.
and be polite.
That has its own sub-rules like don't impose, give options so people don't feel forced,
Right.
and make the other person feel good or just, be friendly.
So the researchers took both of these models, Brown and Levinson's strategies and Lakoff's rules,
Yeah,
and basically applied them to the WhatsApp messages to see what the students were actually doing.
exactly. They did a qualitative analysis, looked closely at the chat logs from a group over, I think, the last 2 months of a course.
Okay.
And they also did a focus group discussion with some of the students afterwards.
To get their perspective.
Right, to understand the impact. So they analyzed the chat screenshots using those politeness theories, and the focus group chats helped them figure out what effect it all had on the students' learning.
Okay, let's put the theory aside for a moment. What did they actually find in those messages? Which strategies were popping up most often?
This is where it gets really interesting. Analyzing the messages with Brown and Levinson's framework, they found a really strong pattern.
Yeah.
Students overwhelmingly used positive politeness strategies. That was like 65% of the messages they analyzed.
Wow, a clear majority.
Yeah, which kind of fits with other research suggesting that building that connection is often a top priority.
Makes sense. What about the others?
Negative politeness, focusing on not imposing, showed up about 30% of the time. Still significant,
Okay.
but being bald on record, just totally direct, that was really rare, only about 5%.
Huh. So definitely leaning toward the relationship side. What about when they looked through Lakoff's lens? Did it match up?
It did, pretty closely. Using her principles, they found students use the be polite strategy more often, about 60% of the time,
Okay.
compared to the be clear strategy, which was around 40%. So again, it seems the social aspect, being polite, took precedence over just pure clarity or efficiency.
Could you give us some actual examples? Like, what did that positive politeness look like in a WhatsApp message?
Sure. The study gave some great examples. For positive politeness, you'd see students addressing the lecturer or classmates with really respectful or friendly terms. Things like, my honorable lecturer or my beloved friends.
Oh, wow. Quite formal but friendly.
Yeah, using those in-group markers to signal closeness and respect. Or sometimes simpler things like just calling classmates mates.
More informal, yeah.
Another example was a student who would ask for permission before asking their main question, sort of seeking agreement first to soften the imposition.
Right. Is it okay if I ask? Sort
Yeah.
of thing. And negative politeness, what did that look like?
Examples there included using hedging words when asking something, adding perhaps or maybe.
Softening the request again?
Exactly. Or sometimes impersonalizing things. The study mentioned a lecturer giving instructions but phrasing it to avoid using I or you directly.
Interesting.
And of course, simple things like apologizing for handing something in late. That's a classic negative politeness move, acknowledging you might have caused inconvenience.
Okay. And that's super rare, bald on record. What was an example of that?
The study mentioned one case where a student just directly asked for more detail. The researchers described it as having a sort of do X feel to it.
Gotcha. Direct and to the point.
Yeah, so it happened, but it clearly wasn't the norm in these class chats.
Okay, so the chat analysis gives us this picture. Students are leaning heavily towards being friendly, building a rapport, and generally being polite rather than blunt.
That's the main takeaway from the messages themselves, yeah.
But the million-dollar question, especially for you listening, if you're learning a language or just interested in better communication, what effect did all this politeness effort have on their actual English learning? That's where the focus groups come in, right?
Exactly. This is where we see the impact. The researchers asked the students directly, and some really significant benefits came out.
Like what?
Well, first off, motivation. Students actually said that having to use politeness strategies, especially when they needed to contact their lecturers in English,
Yeah, that could be intimidating.
right, it pushed them, it forced them to find the right words, the appropriate language, and they found that motivating. One student said something quite powerful like, it motivates me a lot if I use politeness strategies. If I don't dare to do it, when will I be?
Wow, that's a great attitude.
Yeah.
It forces you to engage more deeply with the language.
Precisely. Beyond just the basic transaction, another benefit was vocabulary enrichment.
Oh, how so?
Because they had to find polite and suitable English words, they were constantly looking things up, searching for alternatives. So they were building their vocabulary unconsciously in a really practical, need-based way.
That makes a lot of sense. Anything else?
Yes, and this might surprise some people. It boosted their grammar awareness.
Grammar. How does politeness connect to grammar?
Well, the students felt that using correct grammar was actually part of being polite in written communication. It was essential to make sure they were understood correctly and didn't accidentally cause offense through errors.
Ah, I see. Clarity is part of respect.
Exactly. One student explicitly said, "This politeness strategy forced us to use appropriate vocabulary, appropriate grammar, and non-offensive sentences." They saw grammar as directly linked to being polite and clear.
Interesting.
And finally, they just felt it improved their overall writing skills. Practicing how to form these polite messages helped them write more coherently in English overall.
Okay, that's quite a few positives.
Yeah.
It really makes a case for learning politeness not just as a social skill, but as a language learning tool.
It does.
But surely it wasn't all smooth sailing. Were there any, downsides or challenges mentioned?
Oh, for sure. It's definitely not that simple. The study captured some important nuances, like the difference between talking to friends and talking to lecturers.
Right.
Students felt way more comfortable using English slang and informal language with their friends in chats. They learned different kinds of vocabulary that way, too.
Makes sense. You use different registers.
Totally. One student said, "I rarely use politeness strategies with my friends because I use English slang with them. So the context completely changes the goal and the language."
Yeah, you're not going to say "my honorable buddy" to your friend.
Exactly. Another point was about speed and fluidity. Some students found that trying to be polite felt like it delayed somehow.
Ah, because you have to think more.
Yeah, should think carefully first,
Yeah.
as one put it. So there's maybe a tension there, especially for learners, between being accurate and polite and just communicating quickly.
I can see that. Sometimes you just want to get the message across.
Right. One student even said they preferred being direct because we don't need to talk much. A very practical viewpoint.
Fair enough.
And another factor seemed to be intrinsic motivation, how much the student wanted to use these strategies.
Ah, so it depends on the learner.
Yeah. Those who are already keen to improve and engage with politeness benefited more. For others, if it didn't feel like a must, that extra effort could feel more like a barrier than a boost.
That makes sense. You have to be willing to put in the work.
Yeah.
One other thing that sounds really fascinating was the cultural connection they mentioned.
Yes, this was a great point. Politeness is so deeply tied to culture. The study noted Indonesia is generally seen as a high context culture, where politeness and maintaining harmony are really, really important cultural values, whatever language you're speaking.
Okay.
So for these students, politeness wasn't some new foreign concept. It was already part of their cultural DNA. The challenge and the learning opportunity was figuring out how to express that existing politeness appropriately in English.
So it's like translating a cultural value into a new linguistic system.
Exactly. And doing that helps them understand the target language culture better, too. One participant actually mentioned that noticing politeness differences across cultures can motivate us to learn about the target language.
Wow, that shows a real awareness of language and culture being linked.
Definitely. It's inseparable.
Okay, so let's try and wrap our heads around all of this. If we pull all these threads together from this deep dive, what are the main things for you, the listener, to take away?
I think the core finding is pretty clear. These EFL students in Indonesia, in their class WhatsApp chats, are actively using politeness strategies, and they're heavily favoring the ones that build connection. Positive politeness, lake-offs, be polite stuff, over just being direct.
Right, relationship first.
Yeah. And crucially, this isn't just about being nice. The very act of figuring out how to be polite in English seems to work as a kind of catalyst for their language learning.
Boosting motivation, vocab, grammar awareness, writing.
Exactly. But
it's not a magic wand.
no. Context as huge friends versus lecturers is a different ballgame. And the individual student's own drive and comfort level with maybe slowing down their communication to be more careful, that matters too.
This study really seems to highlight that even our quick digital chats, especially in education, are deeply social.
Absolutely. Politeness, even in text, is vital, especially when you're communicating across languages and cultures without any of those nonverbal cues to help you out.
It makes a strong case for teaching pragmatic skills, knowing how to use language in different situations, right alongside the grammar rules and vocabulary lists.
Couldn't agree more.
And understanding these dynamics, hopefully, is really useful for you listening. Whether you're learning a language yourself or working with people from different backgrounds online, or honestly, just trying to make sure your own texts and emails land the right way.
It helps you see the layers underneath the words.
Layers of social meaning.
Yeah. And the study itself points to more questions like, how does this play out on other platforms, Instagram, email, or how does online politeness compare to face-to-face for the same people?
Lots more to explore there. So, okay, we've unpacked how politeness shows up in these specific EFL WhatsApp chats.
And looked at the surprising and sometimes complicated ways it impacts language learning.
It leaves us with a final thought, maybe.
Yeah, a kind of provocative question, perhaps. Given that politeness rules are so cultural and digital communication just keeps changing,
Right.
how might the ways language learners figure out online politeness today actually end up shaping the future of what we consider polite communication? Not just online, but maybe offline too, across different languages and cultures.
Huh. That's something to chew on, how today's digital habits might reshape tomorrow's social norms.
Exactly. Something to maybe think about next time you're typing out a message.